Alright, so today we are ranking every single major Destiny release since D1. We're gonna go, as you can see, from Destiny 1 itself all the way to Episode 1, or Episode 1, Act 1, Destiny 2 Echoes. As you can see, I took the time to put this out chronologically to the best of my ability. There might be some discrepancy in here. But without further ado, let's start with the Old King Destiny 1. So we have S, A, B, C, and D. And if it wasn't for nostalgia, I really think D1 would be remembered as one of the worst releases, which is why it's gonna get put in the C tier. Now, the D1 alpha vets might get mad at me for that, but in honesty, Destiny 1 just was not it at the time. The story was horrible, there were some cool guns in there, and doing Vogue for the first time will always have a special place in my mind and in my heart. But honestly, Vogue as a raid has been power crept, and not only that, it has just been, again, power crept not only in the sense that it's so easy now, but again, raids have just evolved so much over the last decade that the experience of Vogue really, I think of it as public event the raid, whereas we think of like Eater of Stars, or we think of that raid layer as a strike. Yeah, Vogue is a public event. Like, you literally do, like, defend the confluxes in there. And that being said, the Dark Below is as a very similar experience, because Crota, again, the nostalgia of doing that for the first time is there. But aside from Crota's End, there wasn't really much to offer from Dark Below. Although, since I am so fond of Crota, I would put it in a C+ tier if it existed, but we're going to put it right next to D1, because again, it just was very lackluster. Now, House of Wolves, for me, was the first time that I actually fell in love with Destiny to a much fuller extent than I did with the first two releases, because we had Trials and because Prison of Elders was so iconic, and so is Varix, and I really hope that we get like a souped up version of Prison of Elders eventually in D2, because I think it'd be awesome. So again, because of those memories, and because it legitimately gave us one of the best game modes ever, it's gonna get a B tier. I would do B plus again if that existed. Maybe I should have made some plus and minus tiers, but House of Wolves was definitely up there, and it challenged what could be a better seasonal slash DLC release. That being said, it is completely trumped by the Taken King, which is immediately gonna go up in the S tier. The sheer amount of content we got was almost enough to give it S tier, but it wasn't just the quantity, it was the quality of this stuff. Oryx was something that was built up to, and it felt so gratifying to finally face him. And not only that, he was just, a menacing villain in comparison to Crota, who kind of just fell over like a wet noodle. But yeah, Oryx was a much better villain in some sense, and it kind of makes sense since he's literally a hive god. Whereas Crota, I guess, is more of a demigod, like a lower rung of that. And, there are potential ties that, might tie back into Oryx when we get into the later story here. Because we know now that maybe it wasn't the Witness who was working with Oryx. Maybe it was the Winnower. Maybe that's how strong Oryx was deemed. Was that, he was maybe even as strong or stronger than the Witness. Obviously, we know that's not the case, but maybe the Winnower was using Oryx as a potential fallback if the Witness failed, and well, we all know the Witness did fail, but obviously Oryx failed a lot sooner than the Witness. But anyways, there's some cool lore stuff out there, and also, lore was a huge part of the Taken King. We got so many Grimoire cards and whatnot that, again, just built up the excitement, not to mention the Books of Sorrows that would eventually come out. That, again, so much lore. I mean, Taken King is the pinnacle of D1 expansions, at least. And again, it set the bar high. It was over delivery, sure, but again, it showed what the potential of a Destiny 2 release could be. Now, next up is Rise of Iron, which You know, I will say overall it was very meh, but I am a huge Wrath of the Machine fan, so again, this would go B plus if it existed in this sense, but B is where it will be. I sincerely hope with, you know, the new episode model that we have, that Bungie is gracious enough to sprinkle in a reprised raid, and hopefully that reprised raid is Wrath of the Machine, because it is such a great experience. And I talk about this all the time because even people who played a lot of D1 didn't get to play Wrath of the Machine that much. At least I didn't. This might be more of a me thing because it was towards the end of D1's lifespan and D2 was right around the corner. So, you know, you play a little bit of Wrath of the Machine and then boom, a whole new game is out. So, you know, going back to the Wrath of the Machine, there would obviously have to be a new raid exotic since Outbreak was the raid exotic. And, you know, Outbreak is already in the game, so you kind of have to, again, find a different exotic to put in there. But the raid weapons are great. The raid as an experience is phenomenal. People, I love the Zamboni. Zamboni is a great encounter, and for people who exclusively have played Destiny 2, it's an experience I hope they get, because again, Siva, Fide, Splicer, Fallen is a cool idea, and it's probably one of the you know, the mini factions of the enemies that was actually really well done, at least in my opinion, because of the lore behind the Fallen and how they really look up to technology as a whole, not just like the Traveler and stuff, but they are like technologically religious, like, so it's again cool from that perspective, but definitely a fun raid. And aside from that, it, you know, April update I will like consider as a mini part of that, but that also brought some cool stuff in, but that isn't here. If April update was here, the Age of Triumph or whatever it was called, it would probably get an A tier in my opinion, because that did bring back old raids and stuff, and the raid exotics, which was a really cool idea. So that would definitely get like an A minus, A tier, but you know. Anyways, now we get to move on to the rebirth of Destiny with Destiny 2. I say the rebirth of Destiny because the releases, the first day releases were very, very, very similar to the original Destiny releases. And I say that because D2 definitely is going to go in the C tier here, because while the Red War campaign was good, I wasn't really satisfied with the ending we got for Gaul, and his character felt like it could have evolved into much more than it did. I could be wrong about that. I mean, that's more of an opinion thing, but the campaign was still really good. It's probably the only saving grace. So I would probably put D2 Vanilla in C+ if I could, because the D1 campaign is like more of a down here, but overall, again, the nostalgia does bump it up to like a C-, C. But yeah, D2 would be a C+, maybe even a B-, because the campaign was just leagues better. But the end game overall, much like D1 endgame, was just non-existent. I mean, there was the raid, and that was it. Like, we think about what we have today with GMs and master raids, and, you know, we have expert versions of seasonal content that we can do, seasonal activities. Yeah, D2 had absolutely none of that. It was horrible until they added, like, prestige raids and whatnot. And then, and that's why Curse of Osiris is looked at as such a bad release. It kind of was a cumulative effect, excuse me, because D2, again, didn't have any endgame, and when we got a public event, essentially, as a DLC, you know, seasonal activity, because that's really what Curse of Osiris and Warmind were. They were more like seasonal releases, but they were called expansions back then. But using that as a measuring stick, yeah, Curse of Osiris was just horrible. Not to mention that, again, we fell back into the story just having horrible pacing. Like, literally, we had this almighty time-bending god, Vex god in Panoptes, who we saw a vision with Osiris of Panoptes literally ending existence in our solar system, like just knocking the sun out, which was probably foreshadowing the endless night that happened in Season of the Splicer. But you know, we had that kind of like existential threat in Panoptes, and again, as soon as we were introduced to Panoptes, we were killing Panoptes. And again, there was not quite the build-up that we got with, say, like Witch Queen or Final Shape. It was, again, a very short ramp-up to killing Panoptes. It would have been cool if maybe we thwarted whatever plan it was Panoptes had in Curse of Osiris, and then maybe, let's say, like in Splicer or any other later season, we actually went and killed Panoptes. Like, let's say he was able to come up with a different way to achieve his goal, and we had to, again, go and stop him. But this time, he actually like risked himself, and again, you know, we had to kill him this time. But it felt like maybe they just had to come up with something to entice players to play the story, because again, everything after the story was just dog water. So that's why Curse of Osiris gets a D. It would get D- if it could. It was just horrible. The story was it could have been better. The execution wasn't there, and that is unfortunately what you'll run into most of the time with these seasonal releases, is that sometimes the story is good, but the distribution of it isn't. And you're probably like, well, how does that, like, what do you mean the distribute? If it's good, it should be good. Well, it's kind of like serving a hot steak on a cold plate. You know, by the time it gets to the customer who's going to eat that steak, it's going to be cold. And that's kind of the best analogy that I have for releases like Curse of Osiris. Like, it just wasn't, again, delivered in the right way. If it was a longer, like a slightly longer drawn-out story that, again, had more of a build-up of the anticipation of fighting Panoptes, and maybe the fight was a little bit more intense, again, it was pretty good in its regular form, but again, it can always be better. It can always be better. And listen, we got that in some of these later expansions, but let's get to Warmind, which, yes, I know, did give us another public event in Escalation Protocol. It's getting a C tier, again, because the story was very meh, and we were fighting a literal hive worm god, and we killed it with the dubstep sticks, the Warmind javelin. Like, come on, dude. Like, it was so lackluster compared to Panoptes, which I know I'm saying, like, well, in comparison, Curse of Osiris' boss was a little bit better, and yeah, a little bit. But if it wasn't for Escalation Protocol and the loot that it gave, and the replayability, the gameplay loop it introduced, Warmind would probably be a D tier release. So yeah, we didn't really get a lot above the B tier, and Forsaken and Taken King were really like the glimpses of greatness that kept a lot of the community around, knowing that Bungie could again reach these peaks and hit that pinnacle. And Forsaken was, again, another example of that. The story was great. We essentially went on this crusade after Cade died, taking out all 8 of the Barons, including their leader, Fikrul the Fanatic, and then, of course, eventually killing Crow, Aldrin. Aldrin, who would be resurrected to become Crow. And, I mean, listen, it was the start of some really cool storylines, and we got those storylines kind of knitted up nicely in the final shape, and Bungie did a really good job. It did take 6 years for those storylines to wrap up, but hey, it still worked. And, you know, not just the story was good, but you had a whole endgame destination in the Dreaming City, and it's something I wish and I hope Bungie maybe thinks about doing eventually, but I think the Pale Heart is honestly good enough to count as almost 2 destinations because of how much stuff there is to do in the Pale Heart, and it's kind of similar to how the Dreaming City ended up being, because there was just, again, a lot of stuff to do in the Dreaming City, not to mention we also had the Tangled Shore that came out. Last Wish was, without a doubt, one of the best raids to ever come out. It was hard, it was challenging, and it's also just a blast, and Riven's one of the coolest bosses that we've ever had, for sure. So many good things came out of Forsaken, and it's simply a shame that we entered another recession here in terms of content, because we have Season of the Drifter, Joker, Wilds, whatever you call it. We got the Reckoning, you know, we got some Gambit stuff. I didn't really play that much during this release, and I don't really have too many fond memories of it, so again, that's gonna go in like a C tier. I really don't think that release was that great. I think we also had the storyline of like, you know, do we want to support the Vanguard or do we kind of want to be Outcast and support the Drifter? You know, it was kind of that the first time we had like decisions to make in our own right instead of essentially, you know, just following the storyline, which was a cool idea, but ultimately that's something that was discontinued after that season. So as it was a cool idea, it never really got introduced again and never really seemed to have any lasting impacts on gameplay. But, you know, spare rations, I guess, you know. And that brings me to Season of the Forge, which I would put in a C+ tier, so I'm going to put it in B just because C is getting a little crowded here. Probably deserves a C, but we're going to give it a C+. It's in B, but just pretend there's a C+ there because the weapons were really good and the activity was okay. I just like whacked my hydro flask because I'm talking like an Italian with my hands. But anyways, Season of the Forge was okay. It was just, I think, a step above Season of the Wilds, or whatever you want to call it. Now, Season of Opulence, this is a season I didn't play much of, but the little bit that I did was really, really good. I'm actually going to slide it into A tier because it's more of a B+ situation. Because Menagerie was, again, a little taste of what a seasonal activity should be. It gives you replayability, it gives you really good loot, a chance to focus some aspects of that loot so that you can have, you know, like, sort of like attunements from Into the Light, which I also kind of wish Into the Light was on this list. But anyways, that system that was introduced with Opulence is something that should be introduced throughout the game today, and they have little bits and pieces of it, like I said, like with attunement and whatnot, a way to focus. And focusing is, again, something that has been introduced into the game, and I'm thankful for that because, you know, just doing strikes to try and get a shadow price as opposed to like it being a guaranteed drop every week and then being able to focus it once you get it to drop, you know, it would suck if that system didn't exist. And Opulence is probably part of the reason we have systems like that. Because again, if you don't respect the player's time at least a little bit and give them a way to get some guaranteed drops or something along those lines, then again, people are not going to respect your game and they're not going to play it as much. And that's that. So you know how we had Forsaken? The pattern continued here. And that we get a really good DLC like Taken King. And then we get a bad one like Shadowkeep or, you know, whatever. Shadowkeep really belongs here, but it might be closer to a D, more like a C-. So maybe we'll put it like I don't know, like somewhere here, I want to say. It's just not, it's not great. The story was so sparse, lacking a villain, so to speak. I mean, we know now that the pyramid ship we were investigating was in fact Nezarek's pyramid ship, which is cool. But again, a lack of an antagonist really made the DLC feel like you were just running around doing errands for Eris, which is cool, don't get me wrong, I like Eris, but you need to have substance in a story to honestly have any meaningful impact on the long-standing story, and there was, again, just zero of that. Very little of that, I should say. There was some, but most of it was in the lore. So, yeah, Shadowkeep was definitely a disappointment, especially because the moon is such a rich place in terms of lore, and we didn't get much in-game developments, so, again, just very, very sad. Next, we have Season of Undying, which, again, I don't have much fond memories of. I think I ended up taking a break from the game around this time. Yeah, it was just mid. I don't remember much about this season, I'm not gonna lie. I know the Vex had a pretty important part in this season, or something like that. And cool, I guess. I remember there being like a Vex portal in the tower or something like that. Like, cool concept and all, but yeah, the Vex have been really underplayed as villains. And, you know, we're finally getting that with Echoes, but yeah, that brings us to Season of the Dawn, which I want to put like somewhere in like a B-. because it did give us the Corridors of Time, which was cool. That little mini event where the community had to come together and kind of figure some stuff out. Of course, we got Saint. We got some really cool weapons. It was a fun season for sure, especially because I was taking a break at the time, so I could just watch from the outside. And I did end up playing a little bit just because I saw how much fun everyone was having. And yeah. But unfortunately, after Season of the Dawn, we had yet another crappy season. And, you know, maybe this is like a D+, because I hate to put anything on Curse of Osiris' level. But yeah, Season of the Worthy was pretty dang close. Like, the event, the seasonal activity was just not it. The in-game event was cool, the almighty crashing and stuff. But yeah, there's a reason why it hasn't been done since, because it was such a slowly unfolding event that it was just painful to watch in person. Cool concept and all, but again, poor execution, as is with most of these releases. But something that got some really nice execution was Season of Arrivals. That's like a B, we'll say B+-ish, somewhere in that for Season of Arrivals. Got like Wither Horde, got some really, really fun lore on the Darkness as a whole. The Tree of Silver Wings was where it was first introduced, at least in-game. And of course, any season with Eris, I'm a simp for, of course with the exception of expansions like Shadowkeep and Dark Below, because those expansions overall were just not great. But Season of Arrivals was really, really cool. And it was a nice little concept to kind of give pay homage to the planets that were getting sunset in a sense. Also kind of giving a lore reason, I guess, for them being taken away. Just before the release of Beyond Light, which Beyond Light, it's really tough for me to say, but I want to put it in like a C+. And I know I'm hovering mostly around the B and C tier for most of this, but Beyond Light was okay. The story was, again, very meh, in a sense that Shadowkeep, we didn't have a villain, and Beyond Light we did, but like we didn't kill the villain. We kind of just like fought her a little bit, and then she froze. And I know there's some lore reasons behind that. Probably I haven't really looked much into that. And you know, Aramis, excuse me, is still a part of the story, and seemingly will have a role to play in coming episodes. But, you know, aside from that, really the best part of Beyond Light is the Deepstone Crypt, Deepstone Lullaby, hello. Europa as a destination was a cool idea. And, you know, I think maybe with more time in a different medium, maybe Beyond Light would have shined a little bit brighter. But again, it was really just eh. Then we have Season of the Hunt, which, yeah, is gonna go down a little bit here. Maybe like in between D2 and Shadowkeep. Very meh season. Again, just like, it wasn't fun in a sense, in any sense. The weapons were okay. I think that's where we got our first wave frame. And, you know, it was just a long, drawn-out story, very drip-feedy, and it was the beginning of these seasonal stories that just weren't that good. And we ended up getting some better seasons after the release of Hunt, and again, it did continue that trend of seasons that come out with expansions are not good, because it feels like the dev team just doesn't have time to flesh out these stories or the characters or the activities, and it just felt like everything suffered as a result. Of course, after that, we have one of the best seasons that, in my opinion, has ever come out, and we're gonna put it in the A tier. You're probably like, what in the name of baby Jesus are you doing putting a season in A tier? Yeah, Chosen was great, Proving Grounds was great, the Battlegrounds in terms of ad density were amazing, the weapons were good, it felt like a truly fun time to play Destiny outside of an expansion for the first time since Opulence or, again, Season of the Rivals. It was truly a good time, and Kaido was a very fun anti-hero, for sure. Season of the Splicer is gonna get maybe like a C+, sitting in C+, with Season of Arrivals. Again, the lore and whatnot, we fight Quoria, Blade of Savathun or whatever. Again, more Savathun stuff leading up to Savathun's DLC. Savathun by far was one of the most anticipated. Really, she's more of an anti-hero in the story, but for the sake of Witch Queen, she was the villain of that story. But now she's more of an anti-hero. But regardless, she had so much build-up all the way from parts of D1 to really D2 is where we got it with the Song of Savathun strike. That was where the introduction was held. We got pieces of her being introduced in Shadowkeep. And of course, with Season of the Hunt, that was when, of course, that Osiris was taken over by Savathun. Savathun infiltrated the tower and essentially took Osiris's body hostage. And of course, leading up to Witch Queen, would get some intel on the Traveler and whatnot. So yeah, Season of the Chosen started some really cool things. And yeah, Season of the Lost is next. And all I remember is, man, why is it always the Awoken seasons that are just so long? Like, the length of this does take away, but the story was good. I'm probably going to give it like a B- here, maybe something like that. It was good, but it wasn't great. Essentially, you're just recollecting these Techians from the ley lines, and Ager's Scepter was introduced into the story, and it's a cool trace rifle and all, but honestly, all I remember from this season is, why was it so long? Well, of course, because Witch Queen got delayed, but we did get the 30th anniversary pack to kind of feed us some content before the Witch Queen came out. And we're probably going to slot in this somewhere actually above Season of the Lost. It gave us a dungeon. It gave us a new activity in Dares, which is thankfully free to play. It did bring back Gallarhorn, but I honestly, it should have been brought back a while ago. It sucks that it was part of a paid release, but cool, I guess. The armor also is really cool. Guns like Ice Luna, 1000 Yard Stare, Matador, some really solid guns in there as well. Honestly, this is one of the better small releases that Bungie put out, and it was actually somewhat worth your money. Next, of course, is Witch Queen, which is just going to be a rung below those other expansions. And listen, the build-up was there, but the over-delivery was not. It just wasn't quite there. Savathun's throne world as a destination, when you compare it to the Dreadnought or the Dreaming City or the Tingle Shore, it was cool, but it wasn't that pinnacle of a destination that we were expecting from an expansion of this caliber. The lore from this expansion alone was awesome. Getting introduced to the Witness and, seemingly one of the many hands behind all of the bad things that have happened to humanity. And the fact that Savathun was actually kind of was she lying? Was she helping? Maybe a little bit of both. Obviously she has her own motives, but also she does seem to want to help against the Witness, at least. Doesn't necessarily mean she wants to help us live, but she does want to stop whatever the Witness was up to. And of course, that ended up working out, didn't it? Of course, also we know that Sithona was lied to by the Witness. The Witness kind of caused everything that happened to the Krill and whatnot. Season of the Risen was another season where it suffered due to being released with an expansion, so it's going to get a B- as well. It was good in a sense that we got some good story beats with Crow and Keitel and Lord Salad Bar. But again, aside from that, it was another example of a very long drip-fed story that didn't really have that much substance. This next one I might be a little biased on. We're going to give it a high B tier rating, maybe just below Arrivals, in between Splicer and Arrivals, because I love Eris Morn. I love the story beats that we got, you know, kind of like Zavala, Crow, and Keitel kind of like battling through their demons, so to speak. And Duality, in my opinion, even though it's not attached to the season, it did have, again, more of those story beats, where essentially we cut off Callus's ties to some of his better memories, and helped him to become a disciple. And that was just a really cool concept for a dungeon, and overall, I'm just a fan of the aesthetic of that season. So again, it might be lower for you, or maybe even higher for you, but I really enjoyed Season of the Haunted. The story concept and like the delivery does suffer a bit. I would put it in an A tier if the model was a little bit better, but yeah. Season of the Plunder, or Plunder, whatever you want to call it, is definitely going to get around a C tier here. Actually, probably a little bit lower than this, closer to Season of the Hunt. The concept and all was cool. I was really hoping we were getting like our own ship that we could like customize and stuff. Like that would have been sick. But essentially we just stole the spider's catch. Again, another cool concept, but yet again, the delivery and whatnot was lackluster. Now, a sense in which the story and the delivery was not lackluster is Season of the Splicer. Or, not the Splicer, the Season of the Seraph. Man, this was a fun season for sure. Operation Seraph Shield, or whatever, was really cool. I love Revision Zero as a gun. It's a really cool concept. It is such a bulky gun, though. Can we, like, lower how large it is, or, like, change where the sniper scope is? Aside from, from the bulkiness of Revision Zero and the mission, you know, the story beats with Rasputin and his eventual sacrifice to keep the Traveler in the Soul System to defend humanity against the Witness's forces. Although the Traveler leaving might have caused the Witness to just, you know, go after the Traveler. But in all honesty, if the Traveler were to try and just flee the Witness would probably catch it eventually, and the final shape would happen. But if Rasputin did not sacrifice himself to avoid Aramis using the Warmind's technology against the Traveler to blow up the Traveler, there's a really good chance that the Witness would have just, you know, killed everyone anyways. And, you know, if the Traveler had fled, again, the Witness would have caught it eventually, did the final shape, and we'd all be dead anyways. So, you know, either way, humanity ends up losing if the Traveler leaves, or if the Traveler's blown up. So Rasputin taking the L for us, and essentially, again, sacrificing himself, is honestly one of the coolest moments in Destiny. And the cutscene where the Traveler's flying up out into the upper atmosphere of Earth, leaving the last city, is really cool. Next we have Lightfall. And the story is a huge part of this, but I will give it some credit for the aesthetic. Neomuna is really cool, Strand is amazing, and there were some quality life changes that I'm actually going to leave out of this ranking, but again, the story and Strand as a whole are slightly two things that give it some salvation. So that's why I'm going to put it in like a C+, because it's good, but it's not great. The story could have made it a B+, maybe even an A, but again, the payoff was just not there. The Witness got what it wanted, and it all kind of felt like a side mission when it was actually the mission. And again, the story could have been so much better. Callus got done dirty as a boss. You know, he's someone that we've been fighting against and with for a long time, and the payoff just wasn't there compared to other characters like Savathun or Crow, or, you know, a litany of other characters who've had really cool stories. But yeah, I could talk more about Lightfall and its downfall, but, you know, I feel like I've done that enough. Anyways, we have Season of Defiance, which is yet another example of an expansion, or a season suffering because it came with an expansion. So we're gonna put it in about the same tier as Hunt and Plunder. Again, a cool concept, but again, it just felt like filler. It felt like stuff that wasn't too important. Of course, Amanda Holiday dying was meant to be an important thing, but not many people were emotionally tied to her as a character. I could be wrong about that, but she just seemed like the wrong person to kill off, because when Cade got killed off, it was a huge impact to everyone, because he's, you know, such a staple of Destiny. But when Amanda gets killed off, you know, she's kind of like a B tier character, so to speak. And I don't mean that in saying that she isn't a good character. She does have some good lore. It's just that, you know, she didn't have enough story in game built around her for that impact to make any significant change to the story. And it's kind of similar how in Lightfall we had Rohan die, when we really didn't get emotionally attached to Rohan. We didn't have that same emotional attachment to Amanda Holiday. So again, the impact was just negligible. It wasn't there. Next is Season of the Deep, which had to essentially give us some exposition that Lightfall didn't. And, you know, I'm not going to try to blame Season of the Deep for that. I'm going to try to just look at it objectively. And it's another example of this seasonal model just being hot dog water. I do like Asa. I do like a lot of stuff that this season brought. So I will give it like a B-, but it could have been a B+ easy, and it could have been an A- easily. But the reason it's not there is, again, because we had to kind of like follow the same seasonal model as like a Season of the Haunted or Season of the Risen. And again, it was just kind of like the same thing, different day, right? Season of the Witch. Give me more of this. This is going smack dab in like an A, right in the A tier. It was so good. I love the lore bits. I love Eris becoming what she hates in order to essentially get rid of Xivu Arath as a threat. It was such a cool idea to finally see what Eris could do, because up until this point, she really hadn't done anything except advise the Guardian on how to destroy some Hive Gods. But then she was like, nah, Guardian, hold my beer. You're my acolyte now. I'm gonna go do this myself. I'm gonna go, like, legitimately kill Savathun, not once, but twice. For fun. Well, okay, well, once so that I can, you know, banish Xivu Arath. The second time, I'm gonna kill Savathun for fun, because she's you know, she's a see you next Thursday, okay? I'm trying not to get demonetized, so excuse me here. See you next Thursday, okay? It was such a cool concept, and it was done so well. And it was one of the seasons where we had 2 seasonal activities. And then we had this 3rd seasonal activity that was kind of like a secret thing. You know, we had Altars of Sorrows, or not Sorrows, we had Altars of Summoning, I think it was. We also had Spire of Savathun, which is cool. We got some secrets in there. And then we had the Mbaru engine, which was kind of like a secret, like, labyrinth type deal. It was some really cool content in there. And 100% one of my favorite seasons. The weapons were but the lore and the story was so juicy that it just did not matter. Season of the Wish. Man, this one's tough. Another Season of the Lost situation, but I will give it just a slightly higher rating than Season of the Lost. Maybe we're gonna smack it right in between the 30th anniversary and House of Wolves. And you're probably like, well, what makes it better than Season of the Lost? Well, the Coil was a really cool activity. There was like Riven's Lair 2, which I think was just like a smaller version of the Coil, but the Coil was essentially like one of the first scaling activities that we had. Similar to Opulence with the Menagerie, but the Coil was a scaling activity in terms of difficulty, So you essentially did the same thing 4 times in a row, but as you did those things, the locations would change, the bosses would change, and again, the difficulty would scale. But with the difficulty scaling, rewards also scaled. So not only was it rewarding you for doing this harder version, it was also changing it up here and there so that it wasn't too stale. Of course, if you did enough of this, you're going to know every boss, you're going to know every in-between interaction. But, you know, even after that, the rewards were better than some endgame activities and was 100% worth doing every single time. It was a great activity. Also, the exotic mission was okay. It wasn't great. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was still fun doing the first time at least. And, you know, aside from that, there were some decent story beats with Riven, but nothing too crazy. Yeah, the 15th wish, it's real. Cool. Like it. So now we hit the recency bias. And, you know, trying to look out of this in terms of objectivity and comparing Final Shape to like Taken King, Forsaken, Witch Queen. The Final Shape is the culmination of everything. And the delay allowed Bungie to flesh everything out, polish it to a T. It was just so good. I have my review on Final Shape if you want specifics, if you're thinking about buying it. But in my opinion, Final Shape deserves nothing less than the S tier. Maybe like smack dab in between Taken King and Forsaken, because it does have a little bit of over delivery. There's a lot of content baked in. The Pale Heart as a destination is great. The Witness payoff isn't as satisfying as some of the other payoffs, but listen, between the story, between the raid and Excision, it is truly one of the best experiences in Destiny. And, you know, in terms of fighting the strongest being that we've faced so far in the Witness, who's really again a conglomerate of beings, was such a cool concept, and again handled very nicely. And not only that, we got Cade coming back. We kind of knit his story up very nicely. Crow comes into his own as the Hunter Vanguard. Ikora and Zavala, although Zavala does end up losing his ghost, he still mends some broken wounds that he has with some of his past. And Ikora realizes that maybe she can be different. Maybe she can be better. You know, ever since losing Cade, she was kind of meh. You know, she wasn't herself. And she realized that, you know, maybe she can still smile every once in a while, even though the person who made her smile the most in Cade is gone. I know I'm getting a little deep with the story, but the story was really that deep. It was rich in character development, and that's what we need from these expansions. And, you know, a little bit of story development in the episodes and whatnot is good, but getting the amount that we did in the Final Shape is exactly what you should expect from an expansion of this magnitude. It is a fantastic expansion, and I highly recommend you play it if you want to. But yeah, now we have episode 1 Echoes. Now only Act 1 is out, so there's really only 1/3 to criticize right now, to rank. So I'm not going to be too harsh on this, but what I've seen so far, I'm not looking forward to. It's another one of like the Season of the Hunt, Season of the Plunder, or Defiance deals where the story seems cool, but the delivery of the medium isn't good. It's again another drip feed, and you're probably like, well, how has it changed from the seasons? Well, the seasonal stories started, I believe, the second week of Final Shape, like 1 week after the Final Shape came out, which was June 11th. And there was only about 2-3 weeks of story content to do initially with Echoes. And now we're in a hiatus, essentially. So it was like 2-3 weeks on, 3 weeks off. And now we're waiting. This video is being recorded July 4th. The next act will start on July 16th. So there's a lot of time in between, which I mentioned in my Echoes video about how the medium isn't my favorite, how it just it doesn't feel good to have this much time off from the story, but it is good if you want to take a break. It's a perfect opportunity for that. But again, in terms of telling the story, the cohesiveness and whatnot, just it doesn't work, in my opinion. So we'll have to see how it plays out because there's still 2 more acts to go. So like I said, I'm not going to be too harsh on it, but I am going to put it in like a C tier for now, just because I don't like the medium. There's a chance that Act 2 and Act 3 pick up the story, and it maybe bumps itself up to a C plus into a B tier, but we'll have to see. We'll really have to wait and see. Again, it seems like Echoes might fall victim to being a episode that was released next to or right behind an expansion, so maybe the story and whatnot suffers just a little bit, but again, we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, take your screenshot. This is my D1 and 2, the entire Destiny franchise ranked, and yeah, that's a lot of B and C. You might be like, mid-game. You're not wrong entirely. A lot of Destiny has been in this B or C tier, but with bits and pieces that can reach the A and S tier, respectively. And that's why people stick around, because we know that Destiny can routinely hit this mark. Is it going to always hit that mark? No. Is it okay? Absolutely, because, again, there's always that chance. And to have a live service game like this have this much success, I would say anything above, at B tier or above, is successful, right? Or at least, like, good. Obviously, you look down here and you're like, man, that's a lot of stuff that just didn't hit its mark, and you're not wrong. But I think for the most part, Bungie has learned from these releases and been able to turn them into B plus tier releases, or at least I hope so. Anyways, let me know what you guys think about this ranking, obviously respectfully, because a lot of this has to do with opinions and some of it with playtime, because some of these releases I didn't play that much, maybe you played them more and you think of them more fondly. But either way, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.